before 10 minutes.
Okay. Yeah. Well,
how was your good break?
Yeah, it was lovely. What did I do? I actually really enjoyed being in Klang Valley during that time because the roads are open and free, and you can jalan very easy, no problem. So yeah, I like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was but with the pandemic too, you can actually now that it's opened up, you can see the traffic, right? You can see the growth, the volume now. Huh?
Yeah, things are on the move now.
Yes.
How about yourself?
I didn't have that kind of luxury because I had to look after my mom. My mom's 90, and we had an episode at home, so I had to take care of her. And my husband contacted COVID, so and everyone else was. So I was busy looking after people. Yeah.
And with a elderly mom at home, that's a big concern. Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
We have a couple of more. Yeah. So the title is they wanted to know how do they transform and keep to their roots. You know?
Yes. I'm going to kind of weave some of those things that you asked me to talk about. They're going to be kind of interwoven.
Yes.
Within each other rather than 1 point, 2 point, 3 point, 4 point. Yeah.
Yes. I gave for Dr. Mai and Elias, I did give Steve some pointers as to, certain things that I think is necessary to prepare them for the workplace.
Yeah.
No, it was very helpful because asking me to do a talk on aspects of intercultural relationships and communication, etc., for only an hour is torture for me, actually. So, so if I get a little specific direction, that's very helpful.
Yeah,
keeps me on track.
We are. I think as lecturers, we all have that problem. Should we start? Yes, is everyone in already? No.
There are 55 of us now.
I've my students, I have 70 students, 17. So
you're all here? Let me.
Some are trying to log in.
Yes.
How many do we have today? Okay, 55 participants.
I have 21, you have 17, that's 38, and Dr. Mai, you have? I think we can start, we'll start at 12, right?
I think of the students are in, I think.
Yeah, okay, right. Okay, we'll start now, yeah? Hi, everyone, students.
Cannot hear you.
You can't hear me?
Hello, madam.
Yes.
Hi. Okay, all right. So welcome to our global learning session this afternoon. Our session today will focus on intercultural competence, specifically looking at how we can embrace a culture of transformation while staying true to your roots. Our speaker today will also talk about other elements that will prepare you for the workplace. Now, what makes this topic relevant to you? Recognizing our increasingly globalized society and rapid migration patterns, employers are emphasizing the importance of cultural competence as an indispensable 21st century skill. So in order for all of you to future-proof yourselves and become employable, for the next couple of minutes, all of you need to prick up your ears and listen to our distinguished guest. Before he takes us on a cultural journey, allow me to introduce our accomplished speaker. He's an intercultural communication expert, an expert trainer with 25 years experience in teaching and training. He is also a cultural intelligence facilitator and examiner. An excellent communicator, he has worked with many multinational organizations such as Dell, HP, Petronas, General Motors, Kia, Philips, and American Express. here to discuss why cultural competence matters and to give you tips on how to develop your CQ. Please welcome Mr. Steve L. Moose.
All right, thank you so much. And it's my pleasure to be with you all this afternoon and to talk about a subject that I have a lot of appreciation for and passion for and personal experience from. I've been asked to cover a few key areas. So we're going to talk about differences between Canadian culture, which is my home culture, and Malaysian culture. And also some of the barriers to intercultural communication that we may experience when we get into the job market, particularly as Malaysians. And then how we can use CQ and CQ strategies to overcome those barriers. And we're going to conclude by just talking briefly about career opportunities in this field. I'm going to try to finish by 12:50 so that we have about 10 minutes for question and answer. I love questions. In my culture, questions are an expression of engagement, and engagement is an expression of respect. So actually, the more questions, the more respect we show to a speaker in Canadian culture. If you are able to, ladies and gentlemen, I would love to see your face. So if you're able to turn on your camera, I would love to be able to have that interaction with you. Yeah, not a rule, but if you're able to, I thank you so much. Yeah. So just very, very briefly about myself. As I mentioned, I'm originally from Toronto, Canada. I moved to Malaysia in March 2002, primarily to do my case study research for my master's in education. And after I finished publishing, then, you know, my wife and I, every 2 years, we discuss, okay, how are we enjoying Malaysia, the work that we're doing? How are our parents back in Canada? Do they need us? Are winters still cold in Canada? And we factor all those things in, and then we've decided so far 10 times we've decided to renew our work visa. So normally it's for 2 years. So 20 years later, we're still here and we're still having fun. I've lived in Klang Valley my whole time in Malaysia. I lived 6 years in Shah Alam, so not far from where your campus is. And Puchong, Subang. And when I originally came to Malaysia for the first 6 months, I lived in Klang. So I consider Klang to be my Malaysian kampung. So actually in 2018, I balik kampung. I came back to Klang and now I stay in Klang again. So my whole time in Malaysia, I've never lived in Bangsar or Ampang or Mount Kiara or Sri Hartemis, although I like to go eating and drinking there sometimes, but I don't want my neighbors to be Matsales. So my whole life in Malaysia, the 20 years, our neighbors have always been Malaysians, and purposefully. I don't live in some ulu place, but I live in a place where I'm surrounded by people who are everyday Malaysians doing everyday Malaysian things. Yeah. And that's a very, very important thing if I'm going to stand in front of a group of Malaysians and talk about Malaysian culture, because I have about 10 minutes, let's say, to prove that, or to gain their trust, basically, to show them that I love and appreciate Malaysian culture and that what we're going to talk about is of value to them. So if I live in Bangsar and go to all the non-local shops, very difficult to have that relatability, isn't it? Yeah. All right. So what do we do? Well, Culturally Global Training, what we do is about 30% of our work is helping expatriates to settle into Malaysia. But 70% of what we do is working with mainly global teams. So a variety of industries, finance, IT, oil and gas, etc., banking. If they have a global reach, if they have a regional reach, then what we provide is relevant to them. Not all of our participants with global teams are Malaysians. We have a lot in shared service organizations here in Klang Valley, especially, and also in Penang, where you'll find teams are made up of people from Japan or Korea or Thailand or Indonesia, who are also working here in Malaysia. And so we help them to work successfully together and to understand their global colleagues. So that's basically what we do. We have a variety of programs that we offer that address all of their needs, but all of them are based on cultural intelligence. So that's what we're going to focus on in our discussion today as well. So I have some slides. Is it okay if I share them? I'm going to share lots of examples and stories with you in our time together. As I mentioned, if you have questions, please feel free to ask them, okay?
Steve, would
Yeah.
you like them to ask the questions as we go along, or would you like them to keep the questions till the end?
Yeah, I'm going to encourage them to keep the questions till the end.
Okay.
If you are more comfortable to type your question in the chat box, then
Yes.
that's fine.
Okay.
If you're more comfortable to ask it by raising your hand at the end, that's also fine. But I'll take questions at the end. So if you can just take notes as you go along, yeah, and then I look forward to hearing from you. All right. Now, the other thing I'd like to ask you to do now, and I'll just give you about 30 seconds to do this, is if you could have your hand phone ready. We're going to do a couple of quick surveys using Slido. So, of course, we'll show the QR code, which you can scan. But if you have your hand phone ready, then you'll be able to do the survey quickly. Okay. All right. All right. So let's get into specifics of our topic for today. So what we want you to do, and basically what we start all of our programs with our participants talking about, is our cultural comfort zone. Now, if you're going to be future ready, like we just heard in our introductory comments, what do you need to do? What do I need to do? I need to be ready to stretch my cultural comfort zone. Now, when you are working in your own culture, when you're living in your own culture, when you're studying in your own culture, it doesn't require much discomfort. We work with people who have, or we study with people who maybe have difficult personalities. We get that everywhere in the world, right? We find jerks in any culture. But at the same time, how we build relationships, how we demonstrate trust, respect, how we communicate, those things are basically the same. Most Malaysians, no matter what their racial background, generally demonstrate respect in a similar way, build trust in a similar way, communicate in a similar way. So we're not so pushed out of our comfort zone by just our local communities. But when we go to work with people who are from other cultural backgrounds, well, now there's a challenge because maybe they build trust in a completely different way than we do. They demonstrate respect in a completely different way than we do and communicate in a different way than we do. So now it's like, well, that was rude. That was disrespectful. How could you say that to me? Why would you say that out loud? Why would you say that in front of my boss? How could you write that? Why did you put my name? Why did you highlight my name? So these are very common comments that people either self-speak, they say to themselves, or they even say out loud when working with people of other cultures. Why? Because those individuals that we're working with are outside of our cultural comfort zone. So if we're going to be future ready, what do we need to do? We need to expand our cultural comfort zone. Now, if I work alone, right, I don't need to be a rubber band, right? But if I'm going to start to work with others, right, just like with these marker pens, so I don't need a rubber band for one marker pen, but I do need a rubber band if I'm going to bring together several marker pens. So if you're going to be the kind of person that's valued in your organization, where you bring your team together, you don't divide your team, then what do you need to do? What do I need to do? We need to expand our cultural comfort zone. So that's our ultimate goal when we talk about developing intercultural abilities, strengths, is having that cultural elasticity. Yeah. And one of the ways we have that cultural elasticity is in the way we see things, shifting perspective. Now, I love this picture. It's one of my favorites. And it's because the gesture on the left just doesn't fit the person, right? Prince William seems like a really sweet guy, right? Whether we like the royal family or not, he seems like a pretty sweet guy, right? So that gesture on the left doesn't suit his personality. So something's off. So when we shift perspectives, well, then we start to see, yes, actually, I misinterpreted his behavior. And that's what happens when we work with people of other cultures. What they're doing might be with good intention. Actually, in their mind, they're treating you or me with respect. but I don't feel respected. In fact, in local organizations within Malaysia, when people from the West and people from the East commonly work together every day, like for example, in international schools or international universities, or organizations that have a high percentage of white people from Western cultures working in the office, the number one work value among locals is respect. When we give them a list of things to choose from, what are your work values? What drives you on the job? The number one answer is always respect. But when they don't work a lot with people from the West, face to face, maybe virtually, over the phone, through video conferencing, so they're not daily interaction in the office, sitting side by side, well, then good pay and benefits becomes the number one work value and respect drops down. What's the point? The point is, in those situations, the individuals from Western cultures, let's say Anglo cultures specifically, or Germanic cultures specifically, those cultures, maybe they are treating the locals with respect, but because locally we respect in a different way, the local doesn't feel respected. So intentions on both sides are good, but delivery is the problem. So there's a culture clash, right? So what do we need to do? We need to shift our perspective. Now that's a challenge. Do you remember when you were in primary school learning this proverb, right? So what's the principle behind this proverb? Because proverbs teach principles, right? Well, different proverbs can be interpreted in different ways, but the main point is, to the frog under the coconut, the whole world is coconut. So does the frog know he lives in a coconut shell? No, unless one of two things happens. First, maybe his girlfriend comes to visit. We'll call him Freddie. So Fiona comes to visit his girlfriend, and she walks into or hops into the coconut shell, and she's like, whoa, great coconut shell. Wow, where did you find this? And Freddie says, what's a coconut shell? And so then she explains it, right? Coconut shell smells like this, looks like this, tastes like this, right? Etc. So training, one way that we learn about our own culture, our own coconut shell, is through training, through education, like what you're going through right now, right? In this program with UITM. A second way, though, is if Freddie leaves the coconut. He hops away and he discovers different things. Now what can he do? He can contrast. He can contrast. So for me, when I left Canada and came to Malaysia, although my father is from Germany, so I have exposure to German culture and Canadian culture, but coming to Malaysia, there are some huge differences. And I'm going to talk about a few of those in just a moment. So when we leave our coconut shell, all of a sudden, what do we learn? We learn a lot about our own culture. So actually moving to Malaysia helped me to learn so much about Canadian culture. Why? Well, because now it's not what I'm experiencing, not what I'm used to. And so I have to think, in Canada, we do it this way. Why do we do it that way? Because many people can say, oh yeah, in Malaysia, we do like this. In Thailand, we do like that, right? But then why do we do it that way? What's the value behind it? What's driving the behavior, right? It's cultural values, as you all know, because you've been studying about this. So going through that experience helped me to identify what are my Canadian cultural values? What are my personal cultural values, right? So as I worked in Malaysia, I wanted to have good working relationships. I wanted to have respectful relationships built on trust with good communication. That's what any good working relationship includes, right? Can you have a good relationship with somebody you don't trust? Can you have a good relationship with somebody you don't respect? Can you have a good relationship with somebody you don't communicate with? Very difficult, right? Right? So we need those three things, but they are all shaped by the culture that we're from. So I'm going to come back to my Canadian challenges in Malaysia, but first I'd like to ask for your opinion. Now, whoops, jumping around too much. So I'd like you to answer this question. In Malaysian culture, so you can scan the QR code, yeah? Is respect automatic for some people? So respect, do some people automatically get treated differently because of who they are? What do you think? Yes or no? Can you answer that question for us, please? All right, so far 15 people say yes. Okay, I'll give you another 30 seconds. Okay, so the vast majority of you say yes, right? So this is one of the big things that's a difference between Canadian culture, where I'm from, and Malaysian culture. Because generally in Anglo culture, in Nordic cultures, and in Germanic cultures, in general, respect is pretty much earned. It's not automatically given. Even to parents, even to grandparents, even to royalty, even to the government leaders, to teachers. And this has changed a lot over the last 50 years in most of these Western cultures. It used to be in the past that people in authority did get a degree of deference, right? Maybe it's not from the heart respect, but you know, we treat them in a different way because of who they are. But now, you know, I like to refer to it as talk show culture. Particularly, there was one talk show host in the 1990s named Jerry Springer. And people would go on that show in America and they would talk about their parents and how their parents treated them so badly and life was so difficult. And it created a culture in particularly North America where people felt very comfortable to blame their problems on their parents. Can you imagine that happening in Malaysian culture? Would a talk show in Malaysia where you go on the show and you talk about how bad your parents are, would that succeed here in Malaysian culture? Never, right? Why? Because it would be so disrespectful. So when we're at home, what do we learn? We learn the value of respecting those, automatically giving respect to our parents, our grandparents, our older siblings, right? Think about in Malaysian culture, who automatically gets it? Now, when I ask most Malaysians that, I get about 8 to 10 answers. Royalty, government leaders, people in uniform, parents, grandparents, anybody older than me, teachers, both religious and secular, boss, like management, right? National heroes, those with titles, Dato, Tan Sri, Dato Sri, etc., right? So the list is quite extensive, which is why Malaysia is considered to be one of the most hierarchical cultures in the world, right? Now, for many Malaysians who didn't study intercultural aspects, they find that quite surprising. When we tell our participants, actually, you know, generally in Malaysia, Malaysia is considered very hierarchical culture. Depending on whose research you go by, right? Gerd Hofstede refers to it as the most hierarchical culture in the world, right? Wow, really? Most hierarchical? No lah, cannot, right? But actually, when we think about how extensive hierarchy is built into local culture, how it's built into the language. Think about the Malay language. Think about how, if you have, let's say, 2 or 3 older brothers, right? Or 2 or 3 older sisters, what do? You add the suffix, lo, na, su, right? Why? Because you put in hierarchy. In Hokkien, Chinese culture, right? They do the same. Maybe not for abang, but they do for like aunties, auntie number 1, auntie number 2, auntie number 3. In Tamil, they do the same. Maybe for aunties and uncles in Tamil, right? They have Periyama, big mother, then their Amma, then their Chinnama, their small mother, right? So in the language built in is hierarchy. And so we connect that hierarchy to respect. So I don't. Naturally, as a Canadian, I don't. You want me to respect you, you have to earn it. And one of the big areas you earn respect in business, in Canadian culture, is you show up on time. And that was one of the hardest things for me to adjust to in Malaysian culture. I would stand in front of a group of people ready to go for my training and for my class, 9 a.m. and half the class isn't there. And in my culture, that's basically what it is. So I had to disconnect punctuality from respect. Otherwise, I cannot tahan, right? I will feel disrespected all the time. I will start all of my programs angry. Then I show my fierce face. And then what comes in? Wow, the teacher, so scary one, right? Don't ask any questions. He's very fierce. Because Malaysians, what do? You watch the face. You watch the face. The face really matters, isn't it? We watch the face. So I had to learn to, smile. Okay, everybody. Maybe we give it another 5-10 minutes just to see if a few more can arrive before we start. Meanwhile, I'm punching myself behind my back because I'm so angry, but I can't show it, right? Why? Because in my culture, we show respect differently. Now, those ones that came late, did they come in thinking, yeah, screw him. We're going to be late. He sucks. No, that's not their intention, right? But maybe if I'm a typical Canadian, I might feel that way, right? I might take it that way, but that's not the intention. So that's where we can have so many situations where both people have the intention of showing respect, but don't feel respected. So in your culture, how do you show respect? How do you demonstrate respect to others? It's very important that you can answer that question. So some of the things that we observe, right? We're careful with our word choice. Maybe we speak more softly to people who are older than us. We're not so direct, right? Maybe even we show more of a modest posture, right? We don't interrupt. We don't challenge. We don't push back. In a school environment, maybe we don't ask questions, right? Maybe we don't ask questions. Some school teachers, they will say, we have 45 minutes on the clock. There's 50 students in here. You each ask one question, going to take 1 minute, right? So no questions. Do the math. Cannot. Many Malaysians have told me their teachers will say like that. So we come from a background where maybe asking questions might be viewed as disrespectful, right? So how we demonstrate respect, very important for us to understand if we're going to work globally, because only then will we be able to understand the differences and identify the differences with the way others demonstrate respect. I'm going to give you a really quick example and a very common one, okay? And I'll stop sharing for just a second. So a very common scenario is in an international school, you might have a 27-year-old single female teacher. Let's say she teaches primary 3, okay? Standard 3. So she comes from the UK. We'll call her Jennifer. We'll call her Jennifer for my example. So Jennifer is 27, she's single, she's fully educated as a school teacher. She comes to Malaysia, she's going to work in KL at an international school. Now, many of the international schools, especially the bigger ones, they have teaching assistants. And many of the teaching assistants are local Malaysian Indians. Because oftentimes, specifically in certain areas of Klang Valley and other parts of Malaysia, we have large populations of Malaysian Indians who speak English very, very well, basically native English speaking. So they come from first language English speaking homes. Jobs at international schools, it pays well, they can be home for them. So it's a good job. Yeah. So okay, we'll call the teaching assistant, we'll call her Priya. Priya is 45 years old. She has 3 children and she's married. And she's worked at the international school for 15 years. Okay. Now, in Jennifer's culture, if she respects Priya, what does she do? Does she treat her as an equal or treat her as superior? She treats her as an equal. In Anglo culture, if we respect somebody, we treat them as an equal because we are non-hierarchical cultures. Whereas in Priya's culture, if she respects somebody, she treats them as superior. But if she measures respect and if she feels she deserves respect, then what does she expect? She expects to be treated as superior. For example, she might expect Jennifer to treat her as like an auntie, or at least an older sister. Maybe she doesn't want her to call her auntie, right? But maybe older sister, right? In her mind, she's thinking, I'm almost 20 years older than you. But what gives value in Priya's culture? For example, traditionally, marriage and children. So she might feel I'm a mother, you know, I'm married, I have children, I've successfully raised my children, right? So that earns her respect, or she feels that it deserves a certain degree of respect. But in Jennifer's culture, she doesn't measure respect that way. Respect is based on performance. Are you good at your job? Do you do your job well? Your personal life is not relevant here in British culture. We don't bring our personal life to the workplace. Personal life is personal life. Workplace life is workplace life. We'll talk more about that in a few minutes. So what happens is Jennifer treats Priya with respect because she does respect her, but she speaks to her like a 27-year-old single female. She speaks to her as an equal. But Priya, how does Priya feel? She feels so disrespected. Why? Because she doesn't feel Jennifer speaks to her as an older sister or an auntie, right? Maybe she should listen more, ask more of Priya, even though Jennifer's the teacher and Priya's the TA. So this is a very common situation in international schools, international universities, and even in workplaces where you have Anglo culture, Malaysian culture working together closely, and they respect in fundamentally different ways. Now, if Jennifer understood Priya's approach to respect, oh, that would change everything, wouldn't it? This is Priya's expectations. Is it? Oh, I didn't know. Right? And if Priya understood Jennifer's differences in respect, well, then it would also impact her, right? So what's the takeaway point from the example? We need to first understand our own approach to respect, and then we can start to learn about how others in other cultures build and demonstrate respect. Because respect affects so much. Let's look at one example of what respect affects, okay? Empowerment. Now, in hierarchical cultures in the workplace, how do leaders lead? Well, think about parents in Malaysian society. Think about teachers. Of course, not the 3 lectures that we have here. They're different one. But the typical cikgu-cikgu in Malaysia, right? So how do they lead a class? Well, generally they tell you what to do. They tell you how to do it, right? So they micromanage you. That's okay. The majority of the world, although they will never admit it, the majority of the world actually wants and needs a degree of micromanagement. Micromanagement just has bad branding. But actually, it's very popular. Very, very popular. Why? Because it makes people feel safe and secure. And if we come from a culture where we're used to hierarchy showing their authority by telling us what to do, it's what we're used to. It's normal, right? This is why these are called cultural norms, because they're normal. It's normal behavior. Now, here's the challenge in the workplace, and this is part of future-proofing now that we talked about earlier. I'm going to show you a survey that was done by the business school INSEAD, together with a very global survey organization called Universum. It's the largest survey ever done of millennials globally. So now I know most of you are not millennials, but you will see the example, okay? So these millennials were asked, what do you want in a manager? And the 2 most popular answers in APAC, Asia Pacific region, the 2 most popular answers is we want transparency in the way we're evaluated. We want our bosses to be open and honest about how we're evaluated. Second thing is we want responsibility, right? We want to be empowered. But what do you notice about the APAC cultures? Which culture wants to be empowered the most, and which culture wants to be empowered the least? I'll give you a minute. You check first, huh? So you see, Singapore wants to be empowered the most. Malaysia wants to be empowered the least. Why? Well, there's a direct correlation between how much we want to be empowered with responsibility, and hierarchyism. Respect. Is it automatic? Because in hierarchical cultures, strongly hierarchical cultures, what happens is we show respect by keeping quiet and doing what we're told. So then we're not used to being empowered, right? So delegation is often viewed in a negative way. Oftentimes in Malaysia, we call it Tai Chi, right? Wow, you delegate to me, I like Tai Chi, you just dump your work on me, right? But actually in empowering cultures, delegating is a very positive thing. It's an expression of trust. So what happens is, and this is a big challenge for those of us that come from Western cultures and we work in Malaysia, we expect you want responsibility. Why? And this is something I learned about my culture when I came to Malaysia. In Canadian culture, we feel good about ourselves when we have responsibility. So the more responsibility I have, oh, yeah. Pick up my chest, I feel good, I got confidence. Why? Because I have responsibility. So do I want more responsibility? Yes, because responsibility equals confidence, right? So I want. But then when I come to Malaysia and let's say I'm leading Malaysian team, well, I think they also want, right? Because I think everybody's same like me, right? Isn't that how most of us feel? We think that people think like us, right? So then I give them responsibility. What do I want? Hey, Faisal, why this one? Already 4 or 5 days you haven't done. Now I'm too direct. So then now I got communication complaint. Why? Because I assumed that he wants responsibility. But maybe he does, but not in the way I give it, where I just say, here's the ball, there's the goal, go, I believe in you, you can do it. Jayo, right? That's not the way we delegate responsibility in Malaysian cultural context. Right? It's a bit step by step, right? Give a little, give feedback, support, guidance, encouragement, then step back. Next time, give a little bit less support and guidance. Then the next time, give a little bit support, and a little bit less, a little bit less, a little bit less, right? In Canada, I do like that. They will hate me. My subordinates will hate me. There will be a mutiny. I'll be gone. But in Malaysia, this is a very successful way of empowering my team. Build their confidence. Why? Because we're risk averse in this part of the world. Why are we risk averse? Because we're used to the boss, the parents, the teacher doing it for us. Right? So then all of a sudden you want me to do it on my own? Cannot. Right? Now, does that make us less intelligent in Malaysia? No. It's just what we're used to. It's the style of leadership that we're used to. It's not about intelligence. It's about opportunity. It's just different opportunity, right? Different environment, that's all. Yeah. But it's important for us to be aware of the differences. When we're aware of the differences, then we can navigate the differences. So you need to know you. How do you feel about responsibility? Would you ask for more responsibility? Would you take on tasks? Even though there's risk of failure? One of the main reasons why people avoid responsibility, because responsibility leads to accountability. Accountability leads to potential failure. If I fail, I lose face. So what do? Avoid the responsibility, then no face loss, right? And this brings me to the second thing that I'll come back to trust in a moment. For me in Malaysia, another thing that was a big challenge for me to work out is face saving. Face saving, face keeping, face giving, face losing. 4 verbs, all of you language experts, those verbs are very important. So I don't think in terms of saving face, losing face, giving face. Giving face is a big deal, right? Keeping face. So sometimes giving face can be more important than causing somebody to lose face, right? So my brain wasn't programmed to think in terms of face when I come to Malaysia. In fact, in English culture, in Judeo-Christian cultures, which Anglo cultures are based on Judeo-Christian values, face is a weakness, not a strength. So if somebody comes into a business meeting and they behave like they want to be respected, they want to be talked up to, whoa, yeah, we'll show you We'll show you. We'll bring you down. You think you're so special, huh? We will make you look like a fool. Because face is a weakness in that culture, not a strength. You think you're special? You're not. You're just the same as everybody else. Because respect is based on equality, not hierarchy, right? So face saving becomes a big factor for those of us that come into this culture. We must figure that out. But then it's also when you work globally, if somebody causes you to lose face, just remember, they probably didn't intend to do that. They probably just had no idea that they were doing it, right? It's very rare that somebody has a negative intention. Very rare. Now, one of the connections to trust then is when we trust in, let's say, Malaysian culture, oftentimes we can be more direct. But when we go into a business context globally, if we don't know the person and then they're so direct, it can make us feel very embarrassed. But if we have a very comfortable relationship with our team, with our management, the people in the room, when we're having a conversation about maybe a problem, then if it comes out that, we're responsible, etc. Okay, if there's trust on the team, oh, boleh tahan. Okay, right. It's not so bad. But here's a question for you. Do you trust somebody you don't like? Yes or no? Can you answer the question for me? Do you trust somebody you don't like? Now, let's talk about, we're not talking about family environment. We're talking about maybe in the learning environment or in the workplace environment. Now, I know a lot of you or a majority of you don't have workplace experience, but do you trust somebody generally, outside of the family, outside of a friendship only, do you trust somebody you don't like? Oops. All right, so the vast majority say no. And that's a very common answer in Malaysia. Doesn't matter business, what industry, the answer generally is no. Because likability is the gateway to trust for most Asian cultures, particularly Asian cultures that are very relationship driven. Singapore, Hong Kong, a bit less relationship driven, still relationship very important. But in Malaysian culture, Thai culture, Indonesian culture, likability is a big part of it. In China, it's more about how you make me look in front of my boss. You make me look good in front of my boss, then I trust you. Because appearance in front of the boss is the most important thing. So likability. Whereas if I'm from Germany or Canada or the US, I don't care if I like you. I go to work not to make friends. I go to work to do the damn job. You do it well, I trust you. You don't do it well, I don't trust you. So what happens is I'm new to Canada. I'm new to Malaysia, let's say, not Steve. Let's imagine we call him Frank. Okay, Frank comes from Canada. He comes to Malaysia. He's going to lead a team in Malaysia. And this is a very common experience. Leads a team in Malaysia. He has his Malaysian subordinate who his predecessor tells him, wow, Frank, you keep your eye on Nur Shakeen. She's got great potential. Okay, so he takes note of Nura, and so then he decides, okay, I'm going to delegate. I'm a bit overwhelmed with my work. I'm going to delegate something to Nura. So remember, in his culture, in Canadian culture, delegating positive. It means I trust you. So he delegates to her. He says to her, okay, this is what I need you to do. This is the timeline. These are the resources you have. This is the objectives. Okay, any questions? No questions, huh? So, okay, I leave it with you. Listen, any questions at all, I'm here to help you. You just come and see me and I will answer any questions you have. Okay? Okay, so then Frank walks away. Frank thinks that went well. However, Frank doesn't realize it did not go well. Why? Well, later that day, Frank goes and has lunch with Mayin. And Mayin used to be Nur Shakeen's boss. Last time, different department. Okay. So Mayin and Frank, they know each other. Maybe they attended conferences together in the past, etc. Okay, so they're having lunch together, and Mayin asks Frank, how's your first day on the job going? Well, he says, going really well. I had a nice chat with Nur Shakeen. My predecessor said that she's somebody I should really train up. invest in. So I delegated one project to her. Yeah. Mayin says, yeah, actually, yeah, Nura Shikin came by my office. She had some questions about that project. So I helped her with that. Yeah, really nice to hear that you shared that with her. Frank says, sorry, she came by your office and asked questions. Yeah, she had a few questions. I specifically told her to come to my office if she had any questions. Why didn't she come to my office? Now, as Malaysians, you know the answer is no. What's the difference? She trusts me. She doesn't trust Frank because she doesn't know him. She doesn't like him. In Germany, that would never happen. In Canada, that would never happen. Why? Because you trust the position. You trust the credentials. This person was hired to do the job. They've worked in the organization for 15, 20 years, whatever. They are the boss, so you automatically trust that they can answer your questions. It's not based on a feeling. But in most Asian cultures, like Malaysia, it's based on a feeling. Mayin, last time I worked with her. Nurshikin, if I'm Nurshikin, I work with her. I know her. She's not going to scold me if I ask questions. She's not going to make me feel stupid. So I ask her questions, right? It's based on a feeling. So I love to use the trust equation by Dr. Charles Green. So Dr. Charles Green taught that all over the world, trust is built in three primary ways: credibility, reliability, and intimacy. Intimacy is relationship building. Credibility, so credibility is like empirical evidence, facts, data, qualifications, right? Reliability is, do you deliver results? You show up. I need you, you're there, right? I give you target date, you reach the target date, maybe even early, you are reliable. So these are the three main areas. Now, in every culture, these three things are relevant. But in every culture, some, particularly one, is more relevant than the rest. So in German culture, in French culture, credibility. You give a presentation to Germans, you give a presentation to the French, you put your data up front. This is what my data is based on, my research here, this is the guiding principles I went by, this is the people that were surveyed, Then you get into your results. America, we don't. North America, we don't care about all that. I don't care how you got to I just want to know the results. I just want to know, how does this impact me, right? So reliability driven, results, capitalistic cultures. And then lastly, intimacy. You know the person or not? Have you used their service before? Do you know anybody that you could recommend? Right? Relationships. Success in Malaysia is very affected by relationships. So we need to understand that the people we work with globally, you want to future-proof yourself. You want to show cultural elasticity. We need to understand we don't trust in the same way. So for me, coming to Malaysia as a Canadian, I needed to invest in relationships. Go makan together, lepat together, right? Be comfortable with long periods of silence. Long periods of silence. How is that relevant to relationship? Well, because I can't be focused on just using my time always to accomplish something. Think about in Malaysian culture. We sit in silence quite commonly, isn't it? Right? It's a relaxed environment. Right? Then people open up more. They share more. They talk more. Right? Build trust more. But we need to understand when your boss walks into your office or when you gets you on the phone or on a video call and gets straight to the point. Okay, so the purpose of the meeting today is Wow, my boss so cold one, huh? Actually, he's not cold. She's not cold. It's that they are task focused. Their culture is specific to the task. Get the job done. They don't come to work to make friends. They have friends outside of work. Malaysian workplace, very loud. Why? Because it's very social, very social. But if you go to Europe, work in North America, generally you will find it's much quieter because people are at their workplace, they're focused. If they're talking on the phone to customer or client. Right? So break time, yes, social. Non-break time, work. Yeah. Whereas in most Asian cultures, the personal and the professional very overlap. Very overlap. So what's the point? The point is we need to be aware of these aspects of our culture. How well do we know our own coconut shell, right? And then we'll be able to navigate successfully in other cultures. Okay, last point on this, because I'm almost done out of my time. Communication. So what is your approach to communication? How do you communicate? We've talked about face orientation. Face orientation has a huge impact on the way we communicate, what we talk about, how we talk about it. How does uncle touch his nose? Uncle touch his nose like this, or does uncle touch his nose like this? Right? You want to talk to uncle, you cannot talk like this, you must talk like this. So we must go around the subject, right? Many of you just balik kampung. You go back, you talk to the family. Are you careful about what you talk about? How you talk about things? You sit for a while, you talk about all these other things first. Then you have something you want to share, you share at the end. It's very common in most Asian cultures. In fact, not only Asia, Latin America, African cultures, very similar. Even native Indian cultures in the US. Among the native Indians, exactly the same. You must talk about all sorts of things first before you get to your point. So many cultures are this way, but we need to know our approach to communication. So in your culture, can you say no? Can say no to your boss? Can say no to your parents? Can say no to your teacher? Can say no to your older brother or older sister? Maybe. Each family is different. But generally in Malaysian culture, we're careful about who we say no to. We might communicate no. Okay, yeah, I try lah. Now, Malaysian to Malaysian, you know that means no, right? Can you help me on Saturday? Saturday at what time? 2 p.m. Oh, can lah. Can lah. The person is communicating, I'm not coming. We know that. But if they say, 2 p.m. Can. 3 cans? Oh, they're coming. It's different, right? There's a difference between break eye contact, can lah. I think should be okay. Should be okay. They're not coming, or very high probability not coming. But if they say with confidence, they look at you, yeah, can. 2 p.m. Yeah, no problem. Can. They're coming. Right. Communicating no versus saying no. So in most Asian cultures, we communicate no in different ways, right? Which is why Asians working together in APAC teams have more miscommunications than when Western cultures work with Eastern cultures. Why? Because the Western culture, they'll say no, and they mean no, no problem. Say no to the boss, no problem. Say no to the president, no problem, right? Equality based. But in hierarchical cultures, cannot say no, right? In most cases. So I don't really have time to go through this, but basically in low context cultures, which I'm sure you've learned about already, versus high context cultures. In low context cultures, we have a bigger vocabulary we use daily because words really matter. In high context cultures, we generally have a smaller vocabulary we use each day because it's more about the way we put things across. So these are things when ones from Canada like myself come to work in Malaysia, these are challenges we face. But for you as Malaysians, barriers to communication, the number one complaint about working with Malaysians from global partners, where are they? In global calls, in global meetings, bing, Chinwei has joined the call. Hey, Chinwei, yeah, okay, so we're talking about this. Jump in anytime. No Chinwei. He doesn't speak up. In fact, we wrote a whole program all about building the confidence of local Malaysian teams to speak up, because it is the number one complaint. I often make the joke, if Malaysians learn to communicate in the same way they drive, wow, Malaysian global communication would be totally different, right? Totally different. You see in Malaysia, right, when we're merging, two cars, bumper to bumper, kissing already, you still find space, right? You get in between them. You still find that. You break up. You get your way in there, right? You muscle your way. But in global call, don't want to interrupt. Now it's tied to respect. It's tied to respect. It's tied to trust, right? There's a lot of reasons why we don't speak up, interrupt, but we're losing opportunities because of it. In Malaysia, you have so many talented, smart people. But if you don't have a voice in the room, Your talents are lost. So this is the #1 barrier to communication for Malaysians working globally. From our experience, I've been doing this intercultural training for more than 15 years in Malaysia, and I've had thousands and thousands of participants and thousands of bosses, and they almost all of them tell the same thing. Of course, if it's a Japanese boss, he won't tell you that. But when East and West work together, and most global organizations are Western culture driven. So know your own culture, know how to adapt in your local culture, but then know how to adapt when you work globally, if you want to talk about future proofing. Okay, so these are some of the differences. I use, there's a bunch of measuring tools, but one of the ones I like is Aaron Meyer's culture map tool, which you see here. These are some of the value differences between Malaysian culture and Canadian culture, right? So we've talked about some of these things already, how we deal with conflict, how we communicate, how important are relationships, et cetera, et cetera. So we can see Canadian culture, there are some areas where there's bigger gaps than others with Malaysian culture. But I would say the two biggest things, if you are working with Western cultures, is hierarchy versus egalitarianism, so status, right? And secondly, the way we communicate, which is affected by that, So culture in the workplace, all sorts of things we do every day in the workplace, right? Meetings, delegating, collaborating, time management, prioritization, we engage in meetings. All of these things and our behavior in these meetings is shaped by our culture. So culture is needed. If we ignore culture, right, when we work globally, you'll have situations like this. And the bottom one is the one I just mentioned. We don't speak up, what happens? Diminished value. Because for most Western organizations, they measure value by engagement. No engagement, no value. So you get passed over for promotion or for opportunities, yeah? So what do you need? You need cultural intelligence. Now, I'm not sure how much you already know about cultural intelligence, but basically it's our capability to function effectively across various cultural contexts, right? Those cultural contexts can be national culture, generational culture, organizational culture, etc. Now, the 4 basic competencies are drive. Do I have the desire to work effectively with people from this culture? Do I have knowledge of my own culture and theirs? And then using that knowledge to develop a strategy and then putting it into place by under action, making sure it's not based on stereotype, right? And making sure it fits with my own personal values. Yeah. So that's being true to your roots in that sense, right? So there's areas where we're going to stretch our cultural comfort zone, but there might be certain areas where you're not willing to stretch. Okay. But you may need to explain that, right? Like I come from a culture, I'll give you one example. I come from a culture where we do not talk about race. And living in Malaysia, race is a big deal. So that's something I don't compromise on. I don't put importance on race, and I never will, because I do not believe in it from my very soul. But in many, many other areas, I will adapt as much as I can. But there are some values I will not compromise on. I feel all humans are equal and should be treated such. So in that sense, I'm true to my roots. So it's identifying what are my values. That's the first thing we talked about today. But then I need to identify them so that I can choose which ones am I willing to be adaptable in and which ones maybe am I not. Yeah. And the same is true for you. Okay. Because over time, when we work, things influence us. So if I work for American Express for 10 years as a Malaysian, and I've worked with American Express, we've done training programs for them, and I've observed Malaysians in this way, and you work for blue box culture, which is what they refer to themselves as, blue box culture, you either adapt to blue box culture or you go work somewhere else. They are uncompromising. So what happens is your personality going in, your cultural values going in, okay, that's maybe what you could do or what you should do when you were at home with your parents, or what you should do when you were at school or in university. But then you go and work at American Express and you come with your personality, and then they tell you, no, when you work here, this is what you should do. This is how you should behave. This is how you should communicate, right? So what happens? The organizational culture bleeds into the national culture and even affects personality. So maybe you started working at American Express, you're very shy. But now, wow, you're very bold, very outgoing. Why? Because if not, you don't get good review. You don't get promotion, because they value extroverts. They value people who express, who speak up, who get involved. So it affects the way we communicate, the way we respect, the way we build trust. So you can see at the bottom of our screen, we've had this a couple of times. Culture this is our slogan: culture drives people, people drive business. You want to succeed in any job you have in the future, you need to understand, I need to understand, it's people that measure our success, that help us to achieve our success. But culture is what drives those people. So the more you understand their culture, the more effective you'll be. On the job, it's very hard to find people who can do that, who are willing to stretch their cultural comfort zone. Most find it very difficult to do that. If you can learn to do that, it makes you very, very valuable to any global or regional organization. And that includes GLCs. That includes GLCs that have a regional or global reach, yeah, not just MNCs. So takeaway from this section, before I just wrap up on careers, is when we travel to another country, which we're all excited about the opportunities to travel again, when we travel to another country, and let's say we're driving or we're taking transportation of some kind, what do? We watch for the road signs. We watch for the road signs. We pay attention to the road signs more. So when you work with people globally, don't ignore the differences. Look for the signs in the area of the way they respect, the way they trust, the way they communicate. Come back to those three things. There's a lot of tools that measure different values, etc. But if you just focus on these three things, which are the key to successful relationships: respect, trust, communication. Focus on the differences in those areas, you will be able to navigate a global career, global opportunities. One of the things that can help you is be observant to how do these people prioritize? What do they give their attention to? What do they give their energy to? What do they complain about, right? What do they value in others? What do they compliment? Oh, you did really well with that. You see, when my leader says you did really well with that, that tells me my leader values that skill, that ability, right? They're revealing something to me. What do people complain about? They come, oh, I feel so disrespected. What does that tell me? They value respect. Oh man, I'm working overtime all the time, no extra pay. What do they value? They value good pay and benefits, right? My boss never acknowledges the good things that I do. They value individual recognition and achievement. So listen to what people complain about. It's a window into what they value. Because although people might be from different cultures and countries, they may not necessarily be the stereotypical of that culture or country, right? We want to allow for flexibility. So be observant. Be observant. People will reveal to you what their values are. Yeah. Okay. So takeaway points. We've talked about stretch for different concepts of communication, how we build trust, how we demonstrate respect. So we encourage you as you go through this program, as you keep learning in the intercultural context, learn to stretch yourself culturally, develop cultural elasticity, and CQ is what will allow you to do that. So 4 takeaway points from our discussion today. Know your own cultural values. Know what you value personally and what your national culture values. You need to know your starting point. Second thing is learn as much as you can about the cultures you work with. Yeah. Ask questions, be curious, right? In your culture, how do you build trust with others? How do you demonstrate respect, right? Ask people, learn from them, right? And then if you're able to, before you start your career or maybe early on in your career, if you're able to spend time outside of your own culture, outside of your own coconut, this will also really help you in your intercultural journey. Everybody that works with us, that conducts training for us, they must have lived outside of their own culture for at least 5 years. Otherwise, they can't work with us because it just gives you so much perspective. It's essential. Third, When you see a challenge, go back to the 4 competencies of CQ, okay? Drive, knowledge, strategy, action. Be sure that whatever strategy you develop, is something that you are comfortable with. Stay true to your roots, but be as adaptable and as flexible as you can be. And lastly, be prepared to sell your contributions in the local business context, okay? So I'm just going to talk about that for just another minute. Is that okay? Just another minute or two? How are we doing?
Sure.
I'm
Steve.
totally
Go
overtime.
ahead.
I talked about
No.
punctuality and I'm totally overtime.
No, please go ahead. We're enjoying this, please.
So I spend 50% of my time explaining what I do before I can explain how I can help a company. So if I go into an organization, and this is HR people that've been to university, et cetera, because I generally deal with HR and learning and development people, right? And we talk about, intercultural, cross-cultural education, training, consulting, coaching, et cetera. Most people don't understand what that means. You go on LinkedIn these days and you read a lot about, organizational culture, it's a toxic culture, Okay, but what is culture? How did you get to that toxic culture? If your organization has a toxic culture, why? What made it that way, right? Like, you can position yourself in your career as an intercultural or cross-cultural expert, and that's great. But I would say if you can position yourself more broadly as a culture expert, there will be more opportunities for you. What do I mean by that? Well, interculturalism, we often talk about, national cultures, working globally, working regionally. But what about working interorganizationally, right? So I'm an organization that sells a product or a service. Who do I sell it to? Maybe I sell it to other organizations. Does our organizational culture and their organizational culture align, right? Maybe not. Or what about helping within the organization to shape the culture of the organization? There was a newspaper article this week about GLCs and closing down GLCs that are underperforming. We can read a lot online about GLC culture and the challenges that they face. For a lot of you, you may have opportunity to work at GLCs the way the Malaysian business structure is set up. So will you be able to shape those GLCs? Could you be involved in shaping the culture of those GLCs, right? So if those GLCs have the goal to compete more regionally or globally, right, they're going to need a culture shift. So that's a career opportunity that you could be involved with, right? So culture isn't just about people from different countries. It's just about people working together. When people work together, they create a culture. There's a team culture, there's a department culture, there's an organizational culture, there's a national culture, etc. Right? So understanding what makes culture and understanding that it's values, right? But then how do we shift values? How do we shape values? How do we grow values? That's an area where there's a lot of opportunity actually locally. I have very little competition in Malaysia. When it comes to training expats, there's other trainers that do that. There are a few other non-Malaysian trainers like myself who have businesses for intercultural, cross-cultural, and that's excellent because the more it becomes known, the more value people will understand. But my point in this last slide here at the end is be ready to sell what your value contribution is. But first, you need to understand it. First, you need to understand it and what you can bring to that organization, because they may not fully understand what it is that you've learned and what you can do for them. So in a sentence or two, figure out how to sell your value contribution, what your value is, what you bring to the organization. Okay. There's opportunities in organizations in a variety of areas. Of course, you also have opportunities perhaps in diplomatic service, which would be another aspect. that I'm sure maybe you've talked about with your lecturers. So Wisma Putra or in the business community. But I would really encourage you, if you can, try to have exposure over a period of time to other cultures. Yeah. So if you can, maybe there's an opportunity to study, do your master's degree overseas, but don't be a Maggie Me student. Do you know what a Maggie Me student is? Yeah. So don't be one of those Malaysian students that goes to Australia or the US or UK and brings all their Maggie Mee and hangs out with all their Malaysian friends and eats their Maggie Mee and with their chili sauce and never learns about anything outside of Malaysian culture, right? So they spent 2 years in Australia, but they came back more Malaysian than when they left, right? So make local friends. I'm not saying cut off your Malaysian friends, huh? Don't get me wrong, huh? But make friends with locals, with other foreign students, right? Explore, try new things, be curious. You know, I'm not talking about anything inappropriate, nothing haram, but but appropriate things, yeah? So in that sense, you learn more and more about your own coconut shell. So if any of you have, I'm not sure if I'm wrapping up or how, but basically if you have questions, I'm happy to stay on a bit longer and ask and answer any questions you have. I apologize, I've already gone 7 minutes over time. It's very difficult for me to talk about this subject for only an hour, but hopefully there's a few things that you can take away, ladies and gentlemen, and benefit from, yeah?
Yes. Okay, thank you very much, Steve. Yeah. Dini says, I'd like to ask, how can we best, in the chat, right? How can we best draw the line when aligning our cultural or national identity to the values and missions of an organization? The line can be fuzzy and tricky.
Well, I mean, it comes back to, I guess, the point of we need to decide what we're willing to compromise on,
Yes.
what we're not willing to compromise on. You know, like our logo, for example, is a demonstration of this, which is I'm from culture yellow. I come to Malaysia culture blue, right? And so as a Canadian culture yellow, I come with my approach to trust and respect and communication, et cetera, et cetera. And then I come to Malaysia and I need to adapt if I'm going to succeed. Otherwise I won't succeed, right? If I stick to my Canadian ways, my team's going to hate me, right? So I need to adapt. So I absorb with understanding the Malaysian cultural viewpoint. Now, when you have yellow paint and blue paint, and you want to paint a frog, you want green, you add the blue to the yellow. You mix until you get the shade of green that you want. But you don't extract the yellow, you add the blue. So just remember, just because you learn new values doesn't mean that you are rejecting your old values. It just means that I can adapt to different situations. So maybe I believe in straightforward communication, which I do. But I've learned to adapt in Malaysia so that I pick when I engage in straightforward communication and with whom, and when I don't. Now, that doesn't mean I'm not true to my Canadian roots. It just means that I can adapt to different situations to achieve my goal, right? Which is to build good relationships with those that I work with. So, yeah, I hope that gives a bit of perspective on the question. It's adding another layer, yeah? It's adding another layer. Okay, let's go through the next question. Like to ask, as you
new ITM students who don't get as much opportunity to meet non-Bumiputra, how can we step into the culturally diverse working field? Trick question.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that that's why I'm saying, like, you know, as Boomies, you have the opportunity, a lot of you have the opportunity to, if you study hard, you excel, you may have the opportunity for scholarship to go overseas for a period of time. If you want to really go into intercultural aspects of things in your career, I would really work towards one of those opportunities so that you can be in a non-Bumiputra environment and really learn and grow, right? It's actually not about being Bumi or not being, it's a homogenous culture, right? So if I'm from small town Canada, it's white on white, right? So it's the same sort of thing. That person goes to university, studies interculturalism. They have no interculturalism experience, right? Very little, depending on what university they went to. So they also need to just get out of the experience multiculturalism, but true multiculturalism. Remember, just because you have people, 3 or 4 or 5 people from different cultural backgrounds, doesn't mean it's a multicultural environment. If those different cultures are not viewed equally, it's not multiculturalism. So that's the other challenge in Malaysia. We have different races. We're multiracial by definition, but we don't actually practice multiculturalism. So it's important for you as a Bumi to experience multiculturalism, because if you're going to work in the DI environment, diversity inclusion environment, it's about being inclusive, equally inclusive, right? If that's your goal. So you need to experience that and contribute to a truly multicultural environment if you can. So if you can't go overseas, could you work somewhere else in Malaysia? Could you experience it? You know, KL and Penang are different. KL and Sabah are different, right? So you're from Shah Alam, let's say, maybe you're born and raised in Shah Alam or Johor or Malacca. Go and live and work in Penang for a little while. Go and live and work in Sabah for a little while. It's a big culture difference. Go and live and work in Kuching. It's a big culture difference, right? So you can actually experience diverse cultures with just your IC. You don't need passport necessarily, right? Another question.
There could be a time when only one party is willing to understand about the other party's value. So how do you handle?
Well, it depends on which party you are. So I'll be honest, very few people ask me much about my culture. So I experience this all the time. People assume that they know. I remember meeting one HR lady, you know, she worked for this multi-billion dollar oil and gas construction company. And I was there because they had shifted about 400 expats from Singapore to Malaysia. And so we ran training for them, all their expat staff from all over the world, about Malaysian culture. Just a half day, quick overview of understanding Malaysian culture, living and working culture. So she comes down and she, you know, she's a Malay lady. And so, but she shook my hand. So, which is, I'm always aware of when a Malay woman will shake my hand, because it tells me something about her exposure. Yeah. And then, but as she's talking to me, she's like, yeah, it's very interesting, this training. Like, you know, actually in KL, it's not so hard. It's not so hard for expats, you know, because KL is a multicultural society. So it's quite easy for them, not so difficult for them to adapt. Lah. And so, of course, I just smile. I don't want to have conflict, right? But she's wrong. Why is she wrong? Because it's not the things you see that are hard to adapt to in most cases. It's the things you don't see. It's face. It's punctuality and time management. It's conflict. It's style of communication and misunderstanding. It's differences in trust and respect. You can have beautiful skyscrapers, but those things don't change. Those aspects don't change. So my point in telling you that example is, you should generally always expect they're less interested in you than you are in them. Because in general, that's true. If you're in this program, you have a curiosity about culture. They don't, right? They don't have a culture background. So they're not going to know the questions to ask. They're not really going to be so interested because they don't know about it, right? Like if you know nothing about ice hockey, I'm Canadian. I love ice hockey. In Canada, it's ice hockey and then God. So it's our religion. And the playoffs are on right now, and I watched the game this morning. So, but if I said to you, I love ice hockey, do you know what to ask about? Like you might say, okay, well, like what's the purpose of the game? You know, but do you know anything about their equipment or what the different tools are or how long the game lasts? sometimes we don't even know what to ask, so we don't ask anything. And a lot of people are like that. It's not that they don't care about you or your culture, they just don't even know where to start, so they don't ask, right? So we want to just make sure that if we don't want to assume that they're not interested. It might just be they're just not sure what to ask, right? But in general, going back to your question, the more you learn about them, the more you build the relationship, it will create the environment where they will want to learn more about you. So you invest first. It's good for you. It will be good for your career. You invest first, learn about their culture, learn how to adapt, figure out how to adapt to their culture using the strategies we talked about. And then you'll see they will show, generally they will show more interest in you. This is in general. Of course, as I said earlier, you find difficult people in every culture. So that person might just be a difficult person. Okay.
There's, yeah. She's asking, are there any, aside from communication skills, respect, and trust that you mentioned just now, are there anything else that will make it easier for us to work with people from other cultures? What about awareness? Do you think having like basically we talk about the CQ model just now, right? You said drive, knowledge, strategy, and action, right? But with drive, I think awareness is a huge part of everything. Being aware, right? Do you think that fits into the framework, Steve?
So awareness, absolutely. Awareness is the starting point. But then what do we do with the awareness? So our goal is to shift from judgment to understanding, right? So I'm aware that there's a difference between me and my Filipino colleague, okay? So what am I going to do with that awareness? How do I strengthen my awareness? Where do I put my focus? What do I need to be aware of? So, you know, in today's talk, you know, obviously I'm encouraging, be aware of how they show respect, how they build trust, how they communicate. Most of all of the cultural dimensions that you might study about fall under one of those three categories. So communication, respect, or trust, it factors into one of those three. So that's why I focus on those three primarily. But absolutely, it starts with awareness, and then it needs to move into, okay, what do you do with that awareness? So I create understanding, and then with that understanding, I want to put into place strategies to navigate the challenges that I'm facing. So if we're going to get into specifics beyond respect, communication, and trust, I would say different aspects of leadership are important. Different aspects, I mean, you can dig deeply into the communication side. You know, you've got sociolinguistics aspects of communication. You've got psycholinguistics. You've got how we adapt to accent. All sorts of things that there are nuances to those categories. But I'm just pulling back and giving a bit of a broad view of those three.
I've got one more question here. I would like to know, how do we know which company wants intercultural communication students?
Yeah, good question. Good question. Well, here's a simple thing. Are they global or regional? That's the place to start. Is it a global or regional global or regional company? Once you've established that, then it's about figuring out, what are you going to bring to that organization? Now, it's very rare, I would say it's almost never, that an organization puts out a job posting for an interculturalist. You're generally going to be looking at people and culture roles. Okay, so those are the two categories, people and culture. And more organizations are having individuals that have the title of people and culture. You could also have diversity and inclusion people, you know, you know, under the HR umbrella, that's kind of your lane, right? So I would say focus on aspects of people and culture for the organization, diversity and inclusion. Look at those jobs first, if they have them. If they don't, then I would say, if it's an organization you really want to work with, and they don't have any of those postings, I would go to HR and I would write to them and sell yourself, even if they don't have a posting. What do you bring to the organization? You know, are you looking for somebody who can make, and they might be willing to create a post for you, right? So you have to just help them to understand what you're going to bring to the organization.
Okay. I think that's all. Any more questions? I don't see any more. Okay, I think, anyone else have any questions for Mr. Steve? Okay, I think Mr. Steve has been kind enough to stretch his time with us and answer all your questions. And I really like your rubber band metaphor, Steve, to talk about cultural elasticity. I think it's really important for our graduates to remember, coming from a very monocultural environment. I think this is something that, although we talk about it a lot in class, I think the 3 points that they really need to focus on in the CQ model, which is respect, trust, and communication, and knowing their own values. I think that's really, really important for all of them. I think that you've said it so well, and you made it very clear to them, void of theory. So, you know, I think that will definitely remain with all of us at least. Yeah. So thank you so much, Steve.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
No, thank you. Really, thank you. From the bottom of our hearts, we really thank you, because the students needed this, and we also needed, the lecturers also needed this exposure. Thank you so much. Hope to see you again.
Yeah, my pleasure. And please feel free to reach out to us on social media. Yeah. We post every month one or two tips with regards to working globally as Malaysians. So there's lots of things you can learn from some of the posts we have: Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever. Okay. Yeah. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy your lunch.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you again for inviting me. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Just a quick wrap up, Elias and the students. So did you all benefit from this talk?
Yes.
Yeah. So we keep driving about how important it is to develop your cultural intelligence. So this is somebody from outside. As much as he's Canadian, he's Malaysian. So he's telling you, right, that you need to really focus on knowing your own starting point. He said, know your own values. And for those people who always ask about which part of the values do we compromise, so you need to know your own values and then choose what matters, and then you know, compromise and be elastic in the other areas. I think I think that's a good takeaway.
Yeah, I just feel that you know, for him to use the cultural metaphor, cultural elasticity, is just so relevant to our our course. Yes, just
the rubber band metaphor, right? I think it's excellent, right? You all are learning how to develop metaphors, right, to describe your interactions and describe the countries that you choose to, even in your virtual cultural exhibition. You see how easily you can use anything around you, okay, that fits the description of or the criteria, right? It's a matter of using it mindfully and conceptualizing it. Actually, that's why I think this is a good what do you call that, session for you all to. I'm sure your lecturers have talked about Deardorff's model. Actually, his CQ model, which is talking about drive, knowledge, strategy, and action, is pretty much developed from that model that talks about, you know, Deardorff's model, which basically talks about what? I think my class, you all should know what we talked about. What is it talking about? It's talking about for Deardorff's model. I'm sure you all know, right? Please, I think, talk to your lecturers in class about the intercultural communication model by Deardorff, because he illustrated that in terms of drive, knowledge, strategy, and action. So you need to know that, okay, what's important for DDoS models is attitude, knowledge, skills, and behavior. That controls. So it's the same thing. Okay. So whatever, even your FYP that you're thinking about, okay, you want to discuss, you can use this model to discuss it very easily. Okay. Okay. I won't take up your lunch time. Thank you very much. And I hope you learned something today.
It's been a worthwhile experience.
Yeah.
Actually.
Okay.
One of the best, I would say.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye, everyone. Have a good lunch. Thanks, Ilyas.
All right, bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye.